Well, the former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson was in Sydney last night to deliver the 11th John Howard Lecture, organised by the Menzies Research Centre. He delivered a characteristically amusing speech which took us on detours speculating on the contents of 4 and 20 pies, the unpopularity of Russian pop and Johnson's problems with the UK planning authorities as he tries to make extensions to his own home.
And I am glad that we have done something to repair the injustice of the early 1970s when Britain turned her back on Australian farmers, on families who had fought alongside us in 2 world wars, suddenly disappearing. Suddenly disappearing behind the EEC, as it then was, tariff wall, with such brutality that I'm afraid some farmers, I'm told, even took their own lives. And I'm proud that free trade has been intensified and that Marmite is now jostling for space with Vegemite on the shelves of Australian... I don't know whether it really is. It jolly well ought to be, in my view. At least competing. Marmite can compete fair and square with Vegemite. And Australian 4 and 20 pies filled with natural goodness of all kinds. The innards of all sorts of marsupial species, no doubt, can at last be sold at Fortnum and Mason's, where they belong. You know, I'm trying to make some modest improvements to the place I've got, and you wouldn't believe the studies I have to commission into the possibility that newts might wish to inhabit certain portions of the area that is being dug up, and I've had to commission studies into these non-existent theoretical, abstract, hypothetical newts.
Well, those are just a few of the amusing Johnson crowd-pleasing diversions in a very, very entertaining and engaging speech, the 11th John Howard Lecture. But the thrust of his powerful message is that we in the Free West are under threat, challenged by an axis of tyranny from Russia, China, North Korea and Iran, and their proxies in places like Venezuela, Syria and notably Gaza. He made a passionate, perhaps even Churchillian case for why the West needs to offer unconditional support for Ukraine in its war against Russia.
And I spoke to Commander Bereza, to give him his call sign, of the 22nd Mechanized Brigade, and a couple of his officers. And I could see them hunched over the phone, and it was 3 a.m. Ukrainian time, but they were awake in their dugout, freezing cold, they said, and you know what? I felt a kind of shame, embarrassment that, you know, here we were in the comfort, the ease of a Sydney hotel, and there they were facing the horror of that Russian bombardment. As the Ukrainians have faced that horror for getting on for 2 years now. And I thought about the awful reality of what is happening to that citizen army, and it's truly a citizen army of patriotic fighters. The awful mutilations that they're suffering, the First World War injuries, both to body and to mind. And yet these guys were smiling as they talked to me. They were smiling, they were joking, and they were beaming with pride because they were defending their country, fighting for their hearths and homes. And I told them what I know and what I believe, and that is that they will win, and that they must win. Because those soldiers, Commander Bereza and everybody in that mechanized brigade, in that freezing trench in Bakhmut, they are fighting for all of us and for freedom everywhere. And I want to thank Australia, by the way, the people of Australia, for all the help that you've been giving Bushmasters, a total effort worth more than $900 million. But I've got to tell you, I think there's more that can be done. Don't you? I really do. And both our countries, both the UK and Australia, can be giving more. And at this critical time, I hope you'll agree with me, when I say to Congress in the US that the investment that is now blocked, this support for Ukraine, is the most cost-effective investment you could imagine in the long-term security, not just of the Euro-Atlantic area, but of the world. America has given $75 billion. I think it is. America has given $75 billion. This is just 5% of the annual US defense budget. Most of what it buys actually, of course, goes on jobs contracts in the US. And think what that investment buys. If we can help, we, the collective West, supporters, friends of Ukraine, can help them to push Putin out of their country, and they will. Don't fall for this strange, irrational view that Ukraine can't win. They've already kicked Putin out of 50% of the territory that he occupied, okay? So, they're going to win. They're going to win. And if they can do it next year, as I think they can, then we can dramatically reduce the risk of Russian revanchism everywhere. We can help protect Georgia, we can help protect the Baltic states, the whole periphery of the former Soviet Union. After decades of being pushed around, the world's democracies will finally be sending a signal that we're willing to stand up for our values, for the cause of freedom. And that signal will be heard wherever an autocrat is meditating an attack on a neighboring democracy.
Well, the great threats to democracy and freedom include, of course, the Middle East, which is why we have to remain lockstep with Israel, a lone bastion of freedom, steeped in the Judeo-Christian heritage we share, against the barbarians at the gates.
We will be embarking on a new dark ages of geopolitics in which might is seen to be right and the world's autocrats believe that they have the upper hand. And so, of course, Putin is thrilled by the appalling events in Israel and the inevitable distraction from Ukraine. Okay, he doesn't admit that he's thrilled, but believe me, he relishes the distraction. And of course, the Iranian regime rejoices at the atrocities committed by Hamas. Indeed, it's no coincidence, is it, that Iran is providing drones for Putin and providing funding and training for Hamas. Because what we're up against now, the Western liberal democracies, is a great global continuum of evil, and it's an arm wrestle, and we must prevail. And on the way, by the way, we've got to stamp out the anti-Semitism that is sprouting again in Western capitals. It means Jewish kids are once again afraid to take the bus to school in case they're bullied, and middle-class intellectuals tear down the posters of Jewish kids being held hostage by Hamas. And we must call that out for what it is, the emergence from beneath the collective floorboards of the ancient spore of anti-Semitism, that lazy, horrible, diversionary tactic of the human race. Ancient thing. To blame another group for your own failings, to blame Jewish people for things that are going wrong in your own state and your own society. And instead we should focus on the reality of what happened on October the 7th, which was that Israel suffered a disgusting and deliberate terrorist attack. And whatever Israel's failings as a country, it is a democracy. And it is reasonable for a democracy to try to protect itself against terrorism. And so we've got to stick up for these two democracies, Ukraine and Israel, because the events of the last 20 years have shown us and reminded us what conservatives have really known all along, that history isn't actually, it's the Whig view of history. That's conservatives with a small c. The Whig view of history isn't actually necessarily correct. It isn't a one-way ratchet towards progress. Things can go backwards and go dark again. And we're living at a time now when 70% of the world's population live under autocrats of one kind or another. There are probably only about 42, 45 liberal capitalist democracies in the world, of which we happen to be representatives of two of the most important. And more than 3 decades after the end of the Cold War, we're all wising up to the fact that democracy is far more fragile than we've realized.